Aperture.
I do want to thank you all for coming this evening. I'm Leslie Martin. I'm the publisher of the Aperture Foundation book program and also of the photo book review, which is available free of charge at the front. It's a journal all about the photo book. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are not-for-profit, and we're dedicated to connecting the best of contemporary and historic photography to audiences, both in print and in person, as we are here today, and also online. Today we're here to celebrate the publication of Events Ashore by An Millet. This is our second book with An Millet, and very excited to have this. I think it's been almost 10 years from the first publication, and I've had the personal honor and privilege of working with An-Mi on both, and it's been really great to see the work as it's evolved. For those of you who don't know the first book, Small Wars, I think An-Mi will talk a little bit about it, but it's an amazing woven together collection of 3 different series in black and white, and to see the evolution of that exploration of hers from black and white to color photography with a very clear through line of her personal interest in conflict, in the sort of spectacle of war, in the good and the bad things that the US military does. And I think also just in general, an interest in the way that landscape photography can address issues of power and sociology and history. So I do want to take a moment to thank the people who make our public programs possible, as well as the book. We are very grateful to public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Also our board and members of Aperture Foundation. And in making the book Events Ashore possible, we're really grateful to the Lannan Foundation, which helped us bring this book to you. So I'll just say a few words to introduce you to An-Mi, and she has received her Master's of Science degrees from Stanford University and an MFA from Yale University. She's currently a professor at Bard College. I'm curious if anybody here is from Bard. Okay, nice to see you. She's also the recipient of a number of awards, including the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, and of course in 2012 she became a MacArthur Foundation Fellow. Her work has been widely shown and collected internationally. She has a solo exhibition up right now at Milton Keynes, just outside of London, and the work has also been seen at Museum of Modern Art, Bibliothèque Nationale de France, Queensland Art Gallery in Australia, among many others. So I'm going to turn it over now to An-Mi, who is here to talk to you about her work and about Events Ashore. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. It's been such a great pleasure to work with you, and I feel that Aperture's my home away from home. Leslie has supported me directly and indirectly for the last, since the first book, so for the last 9 years, writing letters to support me to gain access to the military. She's done many things, and she's always been here, and I'm so thrilled to be able to do this book with her. So, like it was suggested, it took me 9 years to finish this project, and coming to this, the end of this road, I have had to, I've considered, some very basic questions as to why am I a photographer, what kind of photographer am I, who am I, what am I interested in, and I'd like to address those questions very quickly while I show some old pictures before we talk about the book. Why am I a photographer? It is my medium. I am interested in addressing something that is greater than me. I'm interested in addressing a topic that's extremely complicated, and I feel that photography can do that. I think I may have said in the past, and people have certainly written, that my subject is the military, but it is not really. I think that my subject is about scale, as it relates to power, form, as it relates to historical significance, as it relates to escalation, as it relates to occupation in time. It is about contrast of dimensions, and especially it is about the weight of an individual's life within history, not just mine, but another soldier, a group of soldier, a battalion. And so I was interested in engaging this kind of very complicated topic with photography. I think it is important to be there, to be experiencing whatever it is you're interested in. I think it's important to be there to bear witness and to photograph. And so there it is. I'm definitely interested in making that picture, making the best picture I can, but I'm also interested in the culture of imagery. And so it's important for me to make a picture that somehow resonates beyond what it represents. And I think that's something that I've become acutely aware of when working with a topic that is as controversial as the military. I think as human beings, we are bombarded with images. We look at the news, we read the newspaper, we watch television, and so we have this incredible archive of images, since we were kids, about the various conflicts. And I think it is difficult not to refer to those images when you look at this work in particular. I think people also ask me, well, how much of who you are affects the work? And of course it affects the work, and I like to tell the story. But in the end, I think it's very anecdotal, and it helps in the sense that it makes you understand that I view the world through a particular lens, because I was a refugee and I came here as a teenager, because I could have spent 15 years of my life living under communism, but even though I saw some of the horrors that were inflicted on Vietnam, I was also saved by the American military and given, a new life. And so my conflicted feelings about the military, the uncertainties, my affinities, my guilty pleasures, my confusions, my anxieties, I think those are the things that are my story, and they affect the way I view the world, but in a way it's not that interesting, and it's merely anecdotal. Let me show. So these are the previous projects that were in Small Wars that Leslie talked about. They all have a kind of precept to them and some kind of concept. I think that 29 Palms here deals with the future, that idea of training for something that is going to happen in the future. The reenactments deal with something that happened in the past, and this kind of very funny and very intricate performance art that these reenactors do, and how I got involved with them, and how I made this body of work called Small Wars, which is, this is one of the picture. And Vietnam was about the past and dealing with this memory of what it was like to, if I had grown up in Vietnam and had a sort of more normal childhood. And this is another picture from 29 Palms. So now, what kind of photographer am I? I think that these days, or, well, not these days, but I think in general, people like to have a tagline. I think it's easier for artists to define themselves, or maybe they feel the pressure from the art world to say they're this and that or that. And I suppose I am a street photographer. It's kind of a strange word. But I don't have a problem with it. I'm not against theory. I'm not romantic. I have no romantic notions about what photography is either, but I am really interested in the real world and describing it. And I'm fundamentally aware of the limitations that this kind of photography has, you know, that square rectangle and a kind of very simple and spare title, which I think my titles are kind of nerdy, but they're pretty simple. It's not a whole paragraph that describes a picture. So, you know, I work with those limitations and I'm aware of them and I embrace them. And I love that. I may not be doing that for the next project, but I think that's what I've been committed to for the last 15 or 20 years. I should also say that within that rectangle, you know, I find great pleasure in describing the details, describing the situation, you know, working with the light to bring emotions, to suggest very intricate notions about the world. I think the world is full of surprises, and it kind of surpasses my own imagination, and I'll show you some pictures that will prove that. But beyond the rectangle, I think that working with scale, working with tensions, and the view camera is a perfect tool for that. You can suggest things that are beyond the frame, and that's what I'm interested in. So providing a picture that is extremely descriptive, but also providing a picture that is evocative in many other ways beyond what it represents. We were really lucky to have been able to work with Jeff Dyer, who's an incredible writer, and there was a real synchronicity. It turned out that he had received this residency and been on an aircraft carrier for 2 weeks, and I'd been interested in his work previously to that. So we were able to sync up, and he wrote these really, really wonderful notes that come at the end of the book. And I think reading the notes will make it clear that the pictures work on so many different levels too. And besides just beyond the rectangle, I think in terms of the book form, and I guess perhaps in an exhibition too, I've never had the chance to show the majority of this work before. I think when you start stringing pictures together, it's what happens in between the pictures as well as you go from one to the other, and how that sort of flushes out an idea. Photographers talk about his studio practice. You know, he's a photographer with a studio practice. Well, I think I have a studio practice, and the studio is the world. And sometimes it's, I think Deanne Arbor's, her studio was a very narrow band, and mine's a little wider, but I suppose it's the military, but it encompasses landscape, it encompasses people, and so, it is pretty complicated. The view camera, I've worked with the view camera for 15 years, and I think I'm a very practical person, so I think that when people see the view camera, especially people in the military, they think I am an artist, because it's a wooden camera, has a bellow, it's on a tripod, I'm underneath the dark cloth, as you know. And they think she must be an artist, so if she takes a picture, it's going to take time, so they give you a certain leeway. So yes, it helps, but I don't think a view camera makes you an artist. For me, the view camera is, I think it helps me relate to the world. I don't spend that much time looking at the ground glass, the way a photographer has the viewfinder in their face. I saw Lee Friedlander working a lot last weekend, and every time I took a picture of him working, he had the camera in front of his face. It's a different thing. I like to stand next to my camera, and I like to look at the world. I like to experience the world. I like to experience something, in real time without any sort of screen in front, and the view camera does that. It's slow, I'm slow, I think you can compensate for that slowness. It forces you to pay more attention to things, it forces you to not look at the main central thing that is happening really quickly. You look for this, the thing that may not be necessarily really important, but that eventually could become really powerful and evocative. So you compensate for it. And And I think the main reason also I use the view camera is because it provides you, I have a 5x7 negative in the end, and you can make an incredible print that is very physical. You can walk into the picture, you get a great experience from far away, you get close and you're not disappointed, the details are there. And it's very important for me to be able to express that change in scale. I think a lot of photographs, look great from far away and you get close and it's a bit of a disappointment. So for me, in terms of describing the scale of power, the scale of the individual life within the world, it's important to have that. And so about the book, it was very complicated, and I must say that I feel so lucky that I had the time to really work through the sequence and gather my ideas and have so many and get so much feedback from different people. Leslie, my husband John, Susan Kismaric, they've been really instrumental in flushing this this book, and it's a lot of pictures. It's I think 110 or something pictures. They are from so many different locations, from all the different continents. They involve the ocean, the jungle, the ice, snow, on the ship, groups of 50 people, individuals. It's all over the place. Sometimes the light's beautiful, sometimes the light's not so good. I really struggled in trying to put something together. So I think we divided things in different categories, and then from there we sort of came up with this narrative. And I have always felt a kinship to the literary tradition, and so I think this book in some ways some sort of very extended essay about the subject. And I think it's also very musical in the sense that I'm not interested in telling a story. I'm interested in introducing something. I'm interested in establishing themes about the military. I'm interested in sometimes repeating those themes and repeating them later and clarifying them. And so I think it's musical. I think that being at sea is very slow, living at sea is slow, and so the book can be slow at times, and then it picks up. So I was very inspired by Robert Frank's The Americans as well, and I love the way he introduces the different themes that we all know about. I mean, he has chapters that are not necessarily separate. We've decided to make separate chapters to make people aware that they are in a chapter and that they should think about why certain things come together. But his themes are, patriotism, politics, youth, black culture, music, all of those things are slowly introduced, and then he sort of regroups them towards the end and sort of extends them, and I think that's what we try to do. What else should I say about the book? I think that the book is everything I had wanted it to be. The reproductions are beautiful. I think the size perfect. The designer is brilliant. It's. I think I like to be a bit discreet, and she sort of pushed me to. The cover is sort of bold, but it's still discreet. I don't know. I think it's a great book. So. I'd like to go through it. So I think here, we encounter these different landscapes, and we have Panama, we have the coast of California, we have the Bering Sea, and these are all places where the U.S. military is, the U.S. Navy. We have Antarctica, and we have Australia, and here's the title page, and so up until now, we don't really know whether, that we're dealing with the military. So I think the next bit of pictures before we actually get into the first chapter is to establish that we are dealing with the military. California, and of course the nuclear aircraft carrier, the main function of the carrier is to provide air support to the troops. And so flight ops and dropping bombs and gathering of information. That's all what's happening all the time on an aircraft carrier. And so that's something that I wanted to express, and it's always about trying to capture the essence of something, and I think these pictures do, in the sense that the flight deck is like this beach, and I think if you read Jeff Dye's notes, he writes about that really well. There's a certain choreography on the flight deck that shows how well oiled the machinery is. These pictures are probably closest to what you may see out there about an aircraft carrier. But I think that they work on different levels, again, because of that sense of scale and the sense of the endeavors of the individuals within something that's greater. This is one of the more spectacular and colorful things that you'll see on the flight deck, and it's called a foreign object detection walk, and that's when they walk the length of the flight deck to pick up any pieces of stray metal or anything that could get sucked into a jet and destroy the jet. And this is one of probably the most spontaneous picture that I took. The group of guys that are across on the other side of the picture are, they sort of, God, I forget their names, but they sort of clock the landings, and they record the landings, and at the end of the day, they go through the landings with the pilots to give them a critique. And of course, the aircraft carriers are in the Gulf, and so we're introducing some of the landscapes. This is a sailor on the hospital ship off the coast of Haiti right after the earthquake. And there's something so contemplative about the sea within this context and in general that I thought that this would be another way to sort of introduce that notion. The design of the book is I think we came up with some great solutions. The horizon is something that one has to deal with quite a lot, and I think shrinking certain pictures and extending others sort of allows you to have a seamless sort of transition when you have more than one landscape on the same double page. This picture makes me laugh every time I see it, because when I first showed it, and it's one of the early pictures, someone said to me, "Is that Photoshop?" Because the helicopter is on the horizon line. And it just makes me laugh, because it would just be too easy and too silly, to kind of Photoshop that helicopter on the horizon line. But it's kind of like my flexing of the muscle, I made that picture with a view camera and so on. But I wanted to show it. A beauty, it's something that I think a lot about, and I think I've come a long way in terms of my thoughts about it. And I think I used to be scared of it. Someone would say, "Oh, God, that's so beautiful," and I'd say, "Yes, but I don't want it to be about just beauty." And of course, it's about content. It's about beauty with content. And I think for me, beauty makes sense, especially when there's something threatening to that sense of stillness, that sense of perfection. I think we'll talk later about the idea of the sublime and how it's so appropriate for this work. So this is the first chapter, and it's about the U.S. military encountering other cultures, civilian cultures, cultures from other countries, and what happens. And so, sometimes the structure is very simple. So there they are arriving. And this is what happens when the U.S. Navy and a ship enters a port formally. Everyone is in dress white, and they present themselves formally to the nation, to the country, or to the port. And it's about a projection of power. I sort of couldn't believe my eyes when I saw this and was able to photograph it, and it really translated to something that's even more sublime than I had imagined. The references to historical painting, the Canaletto and the Turners far away, except that they are transport ships and other sorts of ships in Indonesia. But I think the transition of the sky and the ocean down all the way to these guys in dress whites was what really grabbed me. This is when they went to Haiti, and this is right after the earthquake again. This is probably the closest I've been, in addition to being in the Gulf, in theater, when we're dropping bombs in Iraq and Afghanistan doing support. This is right after the earthquake in Haiti, and the US Navy were the only people who could actually bring a ship quickly enough and close enough to the coast to relieve the disaster. And I was interested in the picture, and it's always about, all right, you see these people doing this relief. You could see that in the newspaper, but what else do you see? And for me, it's the body language of these guys. So they're here to help. They've never been to Haiti before, and you can see some Haitians too, you know. The relationship there is interesting. And again, read Jeff Dyer's note. It's the body language, and there's a fine line for me looking at these, and here's a detail, of coming to help and invading and sort of owning something that maybe is not yours. And that's always interesting for me to see it, and I probably, you know, I'm sure it's a reminiscent of what I saw in Vietnam. This is in Thailand, and the Navy is there to train with the Thai and other nations, and they do this every 2 years, and it's some kind of big exercise out on the coast, and there are a lot of people watching as well, and so it's a mix of American soldiers and Thai soldiers standing. So I made these two pictures, and really couldn't decide which one to pick. One is about order, one is about disorder, and why not use both? And it's on the cover of the book. And here's a close-up. I mean, it's extraordinary, you know, the position that you can find them in. And I mean, I set up pictures, and I'll talk about that, but there's just no way I could set something like this and make it feel so convincing. And again, you can see the difference between the Asian soldiers and then the US soldiers, which are the two guys facing us. This is, so we're continuing with encountering other cultures. The picture on the right is the one I'm going to speak about, and it's about the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps travels with the Navy, and they get off the ship and they go to different locations. And here they're helping, in this village, they're helping the governing bodies of the village on how to deal with the possibility of a dam breaking. There's a huge dam next to the village, and it was a sort of emergency brainstorming. And I took, you know, 4 or 5 pictures of this particular event, and this is the one I chose because of the gesture, the what you think of as Black Power gesture, but of course he was not doing that. So again, you know, it's about really being open to what's in front of you and understand what you're interested in and including those pictures, and that picture is very meaningful for me. And to sort of, I think, a break away from the expectations, you know, the Americans are there, they're there to help, they feel superior, but this is what you find. They also do all sorts of other trainings, you know, martial arts. They show the Ghanaians here, you know, the Marine Corps combat art, and then the Ghanaians show them something else in exchange. And here's a close-up of the pictures. But if you look at the details, you know, it looks like the Americans were hit multiple times. So it's always about reading a picture in different layers and making us question what we maybe expect or what we think we understand. I love this picture because you know, the veterinarians, and they're there taking care of a goat. They look like the 3 graces for me. I wanted to introduce that theme, slowly introduce the theme of religion, perhaps, or something that's greater than us. And here the Marine Corps who squatted, He's a specialist in explosive ordnance, and he's teaching the Indonesian combat engineer, on how to look for tripwires. But of course, you know, the hands up, the religious connotations. Here's another double layout. This is a very personal picture. It's about the white man sitting with all these Asian women. And this is in Indonesia, but maybe it has more significance in Vietnam, because a Caucasian man, even now, I think represents curiosity, you know, but also economic power. And I think certainly the American soldier was the way out for me and for many people in 1975, when the communists were at the gates of Saigon. And so he is actually a chaplain, and I wanted him surrounded by all these women. This is a Russian destroyer entering Pearl Harbor for the first time. And so the title is actually very essential here, if you think about the history. American contractors coming to Asia and trying to peddle their wares. And so this contractor is showing off one of the drones. But that idea of man and toys was appealing to me. I love this picture. We are on a Thai aircraft carrier, so I just love the green. I mean, it's crazy that it's that color green. You have a rear admiral, two rear admirals, so the American and the Thai counterpart. You know, he seems bigger, and he's leaning on her chair. He's more comfortable, but I don't know. I go with her. You know, she's sitting, and maybe you think he gave her the seat because she's a woman, but she's in charge. I think she looks more professional. Maybe she seems more solicitous, and she's smiling at him, but she's in charge. This is the second chapter. And it's about the workings of the ship. I photographed a lot of helicopters, and I think it became apparent that for a picture of a helicopter to be interesting, it needed to be more than just a helicopter. And here, I was interested in the way it looked like an insect. The idea of the fog of war, it's something that I come across a lot, you know, whether it's about them not showing me something, not wanting me to photograph something, or about seeing, not seeing, about understanding, not understanding, and this diptych sort of does it for me. It's extraordinary what you see sometimes. You know, it's kind of miraculous. I think one thing that we quickly realized when we put this book together was that it would be a lot easier for the reader to go through this, and if we would get on a ship, stay on a ship for a while, if we were in the jungle, to stay in the jungle for a bit, if we get off the ship, go onto shore, stay on the shore, so it's a bit less disorienting. I don't think people really notice it, but I think it helps with the flow, and so we're getting on the ship now. There's a lot of cleaning. You know, I've made many pictures, but I think this one is the more evocative for me. It's hard to even imagine that they are on an aircraft carrier, a nuclear aircraft carrier, that is the length of 2 football fields. And you know, they're always fighting the salt water, cleaning, painting, and you can see it from the different levels of paint and different colors that it's been started, it's been abandoned, and many things. I am not a portrait photographer. I've always thought of myself as a landscape photographer. But I think the idea of scale is very fitting for people too. I think I talked about the individuals and their relationship to dimensions of something greater. And so portraits are an exercise in scale for me. I think that my pictures started working when I photographed women. And why? Perhaps because I have a daughter, and I was very impressed by how incredibly competent these women were. I was interested in the kind of struggle they had in terms of showing off their expertise and their competency, but still trying to be women, not be, sometimes they just wanted to be one of the guys, you can see from Grace here, or you wanted to be feminine. So how do you do that? How do you find that? I think it's so easy for men because, they know their stuff and they're kind of macho, and there's no disjunction between your image as a woman and your competency. Your image as a man and your competency when you're a man, and for a woman it's a lot harder. Here's a very, very young sailor. I think being able to see things many times, I went on so many different types of ships, so many different types of carriers, Africa, Asia, and there are things that just happen all the time. Target, small arms target practice, or even larger arms, rocket launching, is something that they do a lot. And I think, how do you distill it to something that's essential, that is descriptive but also evocative? And I think this is one of the pictures. You actually don't see them shooting, and if you look at the details, it's pretty extraordinary how the outline of the man is sort of replicated by the outline of the targets. And again, that idea of something greater than us, the clouds. I wanted scale, I wanted all of this to be dwarfed by the air, the weather, that greater than us. The relationship between man and woman on a ship, it's something that I was interested in. It's not necessarily different than in college, perhaps. People flirt, people develop affinities. They can't date, they can't drink, they can't smoke dope. So it's when they're young, it's kind of a tough thing. But I was interested in that. This is an interesting pair for me. It seems like it's not visually or structurally something that is necessarily mine, especially the one on the left. But we're on a small cruiser, so it's one of those small ships that can move very quickly and accompany an aircraft carrier as support. They have incredible firepower. They have these harpoon launchers. But I was so interested. This is a cigarette break, and I walked into this. I didn't set up anything. Again, it looked like a Broadway show. I think someone said South Pacific or a West Side Story. Racial tensions. The military is a very intricate world, and a world upon its own, but all of the issues that we find in the real world, we find in the military as well. These young men were very interesting. We were, this is in the Gulf, but I think I've spoken to many African Americans also who had never really left home until they joined the military, and some of them were going to Africa for the first time, and it was really momentous for them to arrive in Africa. I did photograph men and made some decent portraits, and again the workings of the ship, the launching of jets. The third chapter is about the extremes. It's about the Arctic and the Antarctic, and I had this idea that I wanted to suggest the idea of the military sort of colonizing the frontiers, and it's sort of what they do. So in the Arctic, there's this race for domination in the Arctic because the Northwest Passage is opening up because of global warming and the melting of the ice. In the Arctic, it's the one continent where there's never been a war, but the military has been present from the beginning, and it's there to support science. And the Navy used to run McMurdo Station and South Pole Station. They don't do that anymore, but they still fly all the planes and they bring all the supplies to support the National Science Foundation. But it was really interesting for me that there's never been a conflict. in Antarctica, and many countries have signed a pact to keep it that way. This is in Greenland, and this is where the pilots who fly the planes in Antarctica train in the summer. And so there's this introduction of this forbidding landscape with a very, and it's inhabited by these very primitive structures. This is a helicopter bringing in a warming hut before an exercise that's called an ISEX, which is when all the submarines are brought up, well, 2 submarines are brought up to the Arctic for training. Here we have, on the left, South Pole Station, and those are the LC-130 that land on skis that the Air Force flies down, and the American Air Force are the only pilots that are trained to do that. And on the right side is a fast attack nuclear submarine breaking through the ice. And this is a close-up of the second submarine, and this is the one that I went in, and it was the most extraordinary experience I had. I spent 24 hours in the submarine under the Arctic Sea. Again, the idea of the frontier and this sort of colonization. So this is South Pole Station. I'm sure you've seen many kinds of pictures, but this is what I was interested in, and it's actually not the main station. So, I mean, the left side, I think you see the entrance. You may see the entrance of the old South Pole Station, but I was interested in these tractors and these construction vehicles. And then on the right side, those structures are storage for the main station. And this is a picture that involves wildlife biologists that are taken up to the Arctic by the Coast Guard icebreakers, and the radio tagging walruses to study their movements and their eating habits. And they have bows and arrows. And this is a really interesting picture for me because these guys normally work very far away from the ship. And I could not get them to take me on the helicopter with them so I could photograph them, and I basically arranged for them to reenact the scene. And so we set up right next to the ship, and I get ready to. I come down and get ready to photograph. A couple of camera crews came on the icebreaker with us at some point for a few days, and as soon as they saw the commotion, they saw the bow and arrow, they ran down and stood in front of me and tried to make a picture, and it was really incredible because, you know, it's like a reenactment. And then somebody from NPR came down and yelled, "Reenactment, reenactment, you can't do that." But then she looked at me and she said, "Well, it's okay for you because you're an artist." So there's, you know, that whole moral dimension is so interesting to me. And for me, you know, I mean, you do what you do to get the picture. And this is the last picture to that chapter, the idea of, I think, the 19th century of the ship departing and the colonized people standing there and kind of waving it off, perhaps, or I'm sure you can interpret it in many ways. The 4th chapter is just a reprise of all the themes we talked about and sort of pushing them a little bit further in pictures that may be even more ambiguous. And I think it is the darker chapter, and it alludes to you know, the good things, but also the bad things and the more controversial things that the military has been involved with. So this is an earlier picture, and this was made on the same day, but I think it just takes it a little further, and this is a way to kind of push that theme of the military endeavor within the landscape. And so instead of having 2 Marines standing in the beach, they actually offloading. I love this picture. It's sort of like land art done by the military. You know, it's so beautiful. It's so scary at the same time. This is a 5-panel photograph that was made in the Suez Canal. So it's an aircraft carrier transit through the Suez Canal. It takes about a day. I was only able to do half of it. That's what I was allowed to. I had seen pictures of a ship, not a military ship, but a ship crossing the Suez Canal, I think in the 1920s or something like that, and you could not see the water. So you just see sand dunes and you saw a ship. And I thought, oh God, that's so surreal. I have to get that with my destroyer or my aircraft carrier. And so I worked really hard to make that happen. It was really not easy. But so here I am, and I make, as many pictures as possible. And I really had a difficult time deciding what would work. I think a picture like this, I was afraid that people would mistake the aircraft carrier for a pier. There was no sense of the passage of the landscape. I wanted to suggest, something that's moving across. And so I came up with the idea of these 5 sequential pictures. And if you see them moving across quickly like that, I'm standing in the same position. So everything is the same on the ship, but you have this passing antique landscape in the background. And again, that tension between the military culture and an ancient and civilian culture on the other side was what really worked for me. And of course, the canal is so narrow, and unless you're standing on the edge of the carrier, you won't see the water. And so the carrier just feels like this kind of slumbering beast that is slowly moving across. Traveling at sea is extraordinary, I've never had any desire to do it. I'm not a great swimmer. I think the ocean kind of scares me. But arriving into a new place slowly by boat is really amazing. You don't do that anymore. You fly somewhere and you're kind of thrown into this new culture. So you arrive slowly and you experience the culture. You have time to kind of adjust. You're there, and you have a welcoming band, and there's also a goodbye band when you leave. And it's really very, very emotional. And I wanted to suggest that because I think it almost feels like it's anachronistic these days. There are a lot of things that the military does that is kind of strange. You don't know what it is. They have all sorts of names to describe what they do. So on the left, you have these guys that are part of civil affairs, and they're on this island in the Indian Ocean called Comoros, and there's absolutely nothing there. It's not strategic. It's not deep enough. You can't even have a huge port for any kind of military ships to come in, just small boats. And so there's really no reason to be there until I found out from speaking with these guys that a few years before I arrived, they found out that one of the terrorists who were involved in the bombing of the American embassy in Kenya came from that island, and so suddenly there's now a presence. So what do they do, these civil affairs guys? I think they're CIA. But they go and gather intelligence. They help at the port. They teach English. I wanted to allude to that strangeness. We are in Vietnam now, so believe it or not, the military is back in Vietnam and training with them, and they've had their ships repaired there for a while. Destroyers have actually come in Vietnam, but I think 2011 was the first time there was a real exchange. So this was the diving exercise. So it was fascinating to me that the Vietnam People's Army asked our Navy that the sailors be in dress whites when they go on liberty, which is something the U.S. Navy would not do for security reasons. They do it here for Fleet Week, but they would never do that overseas. But they agreed to it. I think it was important for them to make good impression and to go through with the exercise and the negotiations. But I thought that it's like being in a film as well. So the Vietnamese are actually directing. They're asking these guys to wear their dress whites. And that's fascinating. So they walk around. They go to the bar. They play pool. So I set this up, and of course I think of Vietnam, and I think of Full Metal Jacket, and I think of the scenes with the prostitutes and the bar scenes, and all of what that entails. I think I didn't really, I could have set this up in many ways. I could have had the girl sort of hang on to the guys, but I I was not interested. I wasn't, you know, I think she's a modern woman. She owns this bar, and so I made her play pool. This is another picture that I think is a keystone in the last chapter. It's on a hospital in the U.S. Navy hospital ship off the coast of Vietnam. So they were doing this before the actual renewed military relations. Hospital ships had been coming for a couple of years. It's important, it's not important that we know it's a ship, but I guess from the title you could tell it's a ship. It's probably one of the more heavy-handed pictures that I made. You know, you have the nun, you have the soldier, they're both shaved head, they're both in uniforms, they represent opposite, the most extra polar opposites of what you stand for. But it's an amazing intersection of tradition and history. And I don't think that it sort of simplifies that notion. And yes, it's heavy-handed, but I think recently I thought about Robert Frank's Black Nurse and the White Baby. That's so heavy-handed too, but at the same time, I don't think I think it's a great picture. I think it's a powerful picture, and I think you know, after this slow progression of things, it's important to kind of have a few punches. I think this is a nice double picture layout. On the left, you have a lieutenant commander being photographed in the portrait studio in the belly of an aircraft carrier, and I just love that idea of image making, of controlling your image and what you're photographing, but then showing the scenes and how I think no matter how you control things, the behind the scenes shows and your intentions and perhaps you can see through. There's a transparency. I think that's what I'm trying to suggest, and no matter what the control is. And here's a detail. I love the clouds. And this is a training for anti-piracy. So it's a U.S. Navy destroyer in Mauritius training the Mauritius Marine mariners on how to deal with a ship that you don't know much about and suspecting that maybe there's a pirate. So they're capturing the captain, and I love the fact that one of our Navy sailors is wearing his preppy outfit in the navy blue shirt to kind of play acting. This is in Hawaii. There's a huge exercise every 2 years between the U.S. Navy and, as you saw, the Russian ship coming in, the Russians, the Japanese, most of the Asian countries. So they're exercised at sea, but then also onshore with the Marines. And for me, it's a sort of an allegorical picture. These are Indonesians Marines, and at the top you have a female translator from the army, and it's allegorical. What am I saying? A woman at the top of the heap? Maybe. And here's the detail. And these guys are really macho because I had been in the jungle with them, not necessarily those guys, but the same unit a few years before. And, you know, they're running around skinning snake and walking through the jungle with 120 degrees heat and humidity. We had a lot of fun with some of the sequins. I love this pair. On the left, you have something that may look like World War I, Battle of the Somme, perhaps, but it's the Marine Corps, again, charging on this hill in Hawaii, and on the right side, you have, on the island of Comoros, these Navy Seabees, they're naval mobile construction unit, who are there to help build the schools and are on liberty. Again, that idea of the Americans always feeling so comfortable and owning the space, and that very fragile young boy there. The idea of, you know, we play with guns, we play with ships. We play with airplanes. So the idea of this really impressive gear also being toys, and I hope to create that relationship with by including all of this colorful stuff that comes from one of those fairs. And this is in the Suez Canal. It's the beginning of the convoy that accompanies the aircraft carrier. This is another interesting pair. You have the cook from these Navy Seabees here sitting on the flight line, and it's a very small airport. As you can see, you can just walk out there and sit there. She's just waiting for the changeover, for the new supplies to come. But again, she's sitting out there, and for me, it was very reminiscent of being evacuated from the airport in Vietnam when I was a child. Guantanamo Bay, one of the more controversial things that happens in the Navy. So on the left, you have a treatment clinic and temporary migrant shelters, and this was right after the Haiti earthquake, and so they were trying to get ready for an incredible wave of migrants, but it never happened. And here you have the housing for human rights observers and lawyers who come for the proceedings, but I was interested in the naming of the areas, which is called Camp Justice. It was very difficult to photograph there, and this is a perfect example of what you can come up with when you don't have anything. This is the only time where they look through my ground glass. They prohibited me from photographing this tower. If this other object was in there, I could stand behind this line, but not past that line. It was just incredible. One point they said I could visit the areas where the detainees were, and then it was yanked out. But in the end, I think this picture says it all. This is something that I needed. I didn't realize I needed. It's a very mythological picture that's coming at the end, and I made this very recently. This is actually not that far from here. It's in Virginia, where the explosive ordnance units work. And I had in my mind that I wanted a picture of water explosions, and I was going to find it on this particular trip, but as soon as I got there, that was yanked. And then they said, well, we are doing the scenario where we are checking into these areas that maybe have been contaminated with biohazards and biochemical warfare. And so we are sending a unit in to investigate. So come and take a picture. So I show up. But of course, I can't go into the tunnel. So I'm standing outside and for a half hour, 40 minutes, and I'm just going crazy. And then the guy comes out, and he's, what are they doing? They're just undressing. And so I'm just standing there watching them, thinking, okay, there's no picture here. It's just the bunker. I'm not even interested in the plants. But then I make a picture, and I'm just amazed at that third leg coming out, this kind of centaur. It's dark, and it's, I think it's incredible. So the world is full of surprises. The hospital ship, so a hospital ship, how can I photograph it? How can I make it more interesting? It's incredible. It's white. It's beautiful. It's an old oil tanker that's been converted. We have two of them. We have one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and they can deploy very quickly. And they have, operating rooms. They have whole units. They have problems, of course, making things run smoothly, but they do the best they can. But I was not interested in just photographing it and in a simple way. So I think, again, using scale, making it feel like it's actually floating away, and maybe the ship itself needed help. And again, that sense of power being subjugated by something, military power being subjugated, or human power being subjugated by something greater. And here it's the sea, it's the clouds, it's the air, it's everything else. The idea of the frontier, this is, it's it's beautiful. It's called Chapel of the Snow, and it's the southernest church you would find on the earth. It's in McMurdo Station. The devices that I use, having this woman look through the binocular to reinforce the idea that we're looking at something important next, and I'm so glad that it's actually a woman. And this is on an oil terminal in Iraq in 2007. So we were helping secure these oil terminals. But again, that sense of beauty and something that is threatening it, the domesticity of those tables back there, it was all very interesting to me. And what is she looking at? She's looking at these American sailors returning to Vietnam for the first time, and this is in 2011. And so we are closing circle, and we back to the beginning. Have we learned from our lessons and our mistakes? I'm not so sure. And so I thought it was a perfect ending to this. And then we have Jeff Dyer's notes, which are really wonderful. And right after those notes is this picture, which I made very early on, 2005, in one of my first trips. And this was when I was struggling with the camera on the ship. You know, it's always tilting, and I'm trying to align everything. And for the longest time, you know, I considered these pictures a failure, and I never really looked at them again since 2005 until very recently pulled them out. And I thought, this is great. I mean, they're freezing, they're Marine Corps, you know, I mean, they're like these badass guys. They're standing there, and it's all tilted. And I thought it was really evocative and a great way to end this book. So I hope you'll have a chance to look at it closely and enjoy it. And I hope it's provocative. And I'd be happy to take questions. Well, I think I could have gone on and traveled with the military forever, because there always seems like they're going someplace interesting, or I haven't gone to all the places. I think I set it myself. I set a goal for myself that I would do all the continents and try to see as many missions as possible. And I think after a while, it seemed like I was getting invitations for something I had been to before. You know, West Africa. I'm sure I would find something different. I think I just couldn't find the energy to go through the hassle of putting up with the red tape. I think that part of the reason why maybe some of the underwater stuff was yanked out from me when I wanted to photograph with the EOD unit was because I didn't show as much enthusiasm. You know, I think usually when I go somewhere, I photograph everything. And I think by the time I got there, I sort of knew they were doing these other sort of reenactments, and it just didn't resonate with me, and I kind of stood there, and I think that was a mistake, perhaps. So I think that's when you know. And I think, 9 years is a long time, so I just didn't think that I could find something or come up with something that was not already in the book. Yeah, I think you do know when you come to an end.
How conceptually formed was the project when you started it, and how did that change?
I had no idea what it would be when I started. I went on that, I think, the first 2 trips. It was a very casual invitation, so I had been photographing in 29 Palms, and one of the colonel, I think I was asking him, where are you going next? And they said, because they were leaving, and I mean, you spent a lot of time working with these people, and it comes to an end, you kind of get a little emotional. Not emotional, but you get, so where are you going next? And he said, we're training off the coast of California on these ships, because that unit was part of an expeditionary unit. And they said, come visit us on the ship. And as a landscape photographer, I thought, well, all right, I'm coming to an end. After the desert, why not the ocean? And I thought I would make pictures of ship at sea, loosely inspired by Le Gray. But as soon as I got on those ships, I realized that they were involved everywhere. They go everywhere. The global reach is so extraordinary, and I think I also became aware of some of the personal stories, and I felt that maybe the earlier work was more about landscape and the scale at large, and I wanted to understand more about the human individuals as well. And so I would go on another trip, and there goes Africa, and I thought, okay, Africa, so why not Asia? And I think as I worked along, you know, there was certain type of pictures that became easy to make, and then I would look for a different type of pictures. I knew that I needed some sort of, you know, crux and tension points. You know, you can't just make pictures of them training all the time. So what would be interesting, what would be provocative, and that just sort of pushed me on. And I think, you know, I've had to show this work over the years, I think twice maybe, and it was not necessarily very representative of what the work is, because I think some of the more interesting pictures came towards the end. But it just kind of snowballed over time. I think I also always had the idea of the book in my head, and how I needed, I think, a kind of a large stage to be able to broach everything.
Where would you like to go next?
Oh, what topics? I don't know. Yeah, and maybe it'll be very abstract work. I don't know. But I feel like I can do anything, which is not good, because I still remember being in graduate school and having made these interesting photographs in these craftsman's workshop, and being praised for it in grad school, and then being pushed to do something else. And the next critique, I came back with these landscapes, and I thought, oh, I'm so good, you know, I can portraits, landscape, why not? And I showed, you know, 15 landscape, and I think received one of the worst bashing that a student had received that year. And I still remember Todd Pavichurch telling me, you think you can do anything? And no, you can't do anything. But I don't know. I just feel very liberated, and I feel that I almost feel like I have a free pass to do anything and make mistakes and fail and whatever, you know.
I'm just curious about, as I was listening to you talk, and I think you said in the beginning that you said it was so anecdotal. You're sort of insisting about it being very anecdotal, your own very personal experience of being, in a way, rescued by the American military. And then I was also thinking about Mitch Epstein's body of work, American Power, seems, I think, much more critical, much more just directly critical, even if it's very enamored with the certain kind of beauty of that power. So I was just wondering, when you think about that, like, I feel like I'm making maybe too much of what you thought of, what you said was anecdotal. But I feel like that experience informs the whole thing, like a kind of openness to the incredible nuance and complexity, which makes things
Sure.
photographs so provocative,
No.
open to the beauty, to the danger, to all
No, for sure. But I don't think that's what make these pictures good, you know. And as much as I think the access, people always ask me, well, what about the access? You know, I think the project is interesting despite of the access and despite of who I am. But yes, I think all of those things add up to this kind of experience through which you filter everything. But I guess I cringe a little bit when, you know, people introduce my work and it starts out that I was a refugee. And my work is not about identity, it's not, but yes, of course it colors everything, yeah. Maybe I'm just being a little touchy about it. Because I could spend, you know, an entire lecture telling you stories about my childhood, telling you about stories about almost falling off a ship or falling into a cactus or all that stuff, you know, and it's really fascinating too. But, and I'm tempted to, but I think I kind of restrain myself because I want the work to speak for itself. And I think there are a number of artists whose work is completely linked to the research they do, to, I think, what they see as the limitations of this particular type of photography. But I'm not, or the work is linked to a concept, and I'm not that kind of photographer, at least for this project. But thank you, that's a great question. Yes?
Do you think like that like ideas of death play into your work? Because I mean, for me, when I think of like military, that's like what I always think of. And like I didn't see any pictures of this here that were like kind of.
I don't. I mean, I think if you're in the front line, or if you photograph a real conflict, but this is an organization with people working, people maintaining things, people learning skills, people with issues, people with conflicts, also adventures. You know, for a lot of these guys, it's like a real adventure. You know, they come alive because they feel they have a mission. You know, a lot of people have very boring lives, and suddenly everything comes in focus. They have a mission. They are helping. And that's what I wanted to explore. And I think in a way this work is a manifesto against the simplifications of what the military is. You know, I think people tend to have this reductive ideas of what the military is. You know, you have the yellow ribbon, support the troops, or military equates waste, military equates invasion. So I think I wanted to somehow address both people, left-leaning and right-leaning, in terms of what the military is. But thank you so much for coming. It was a real pleasure.